Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I have a movie recommendation for you. Moonfall. It's available only in theaters. It's a story of the moon getting all cattywampus, and it's going to crash into Earth. And some brave heroes have to do something to go and stop the moon from crashing into the Earth. With just one space shuttle and 3 people, it should work out. The science doesn't make any sense, and the dialogue is complete trash, and the plot is utterly stupid. But it's the kind of movie that is terrible also in sort of all the right ways, where it's just so laughably bad that you realize a little ways in, oh, everybody knew what they were doing here. Everybody was in on the joke. It's a movie about a catastrophe that is also an intentional catastrophe. And if I have any gripe, it's that they didn't go over the top enough. There was more room to fully drug stopper this thing and take it to the next level. When the moon starts to fall in Moonfall, thus the name, see what they did there. Of course, that messes with gravity and the tides, and then the water starts coming up into LA, and everybody's like, we gotta get out of here. And the guy on the news is like, everybody get to Colorado, because I saw on TV that that's higher up than the coast. You gotta get to the mountain. You gotta get to Colorado. That's where it's gonna be safe. And so then everybody flees to the mountains, but the moon is all breaking apart, and it just keeps like shaving the top off of the Colorado Rockies, or like huge chunks of moon will just slam like a giant Walmart-sized meteor into the side of a mountain, and the characters are just standing there next to it, and they're like, rats, we better get moving. Like, you're all dead. What on earth is what happened to physics? This is insane. And I kid you not, as I'm watching Moonfall the other day after an afternoon of working on Matthew chapter 24 in anticipation of our conversation here, and all this stuff about you got to get to the mountains when you see the moon crashing down. I was like, oh, that's the easiest likewise in the world. Because it's just like in the middle of Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus is like, hey, it's going to be really, really, really obvious when it's time to leave all of your stuff and flee to the mountains, when like the horrible, this is it kind of signs start to happen. More on that in just a minute. So far in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus has been saying to his disciples who want to know when the temple's coming apart, when the end of things is going to happen, how will they know? What'll the signs be? Jesus is like, all right, like you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff. You're going to be driving down a road. There are a bunch of landmarks. Those are just going to happen. It's part of the road. Get used to it. Here's some things that are going to happen to you on any given road trip. And particularly if you're following me and heading to this destination, like it's going to be rough. You're going to suffer some stuff, but I told you that was going to happen all along, and I told you it was worth it, and here you still are, so you get it. Then we see a little bit of a pivot here in Matthew 24, verse 15, when he says, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. So in the cinematic masterpiece, Moonfall, you had a situation where people are like, oh, the moon's going to crash into the earth. And people are like, oh, I'll get some extra bread and a little bit of bonus brandy and just call it good. But then the moon starts getting closer and everybody's like, yikes, we need to leave like right now because there's a tidal wave and gravity waves and death is imminent. And they don't even grab their stuff and they just go, because it's not a debate anymore. It's not like, oh, like when is the moon going to show up? Like, oh no, it's here. There it is on the horizon, crashing and wrecking all the stuff. And everybody just knows, like, you better get going. And as the movie plays out, you're like, oh, it would have been good to be getting out the door on the front end of that. That really seems to be the tone of what we're getting here. Like, no, when it's actually time, it won't be stuff that you just see along the road. When the reckoning of history occurs, whatever that exactly is going to look like, you won't be like, maybe. You'll be like, oh, no, this is really, really clear, specifically, at least, for the people who are in Judea and Jerusalem at the time that Jesus is picturing. Now, we're going to have to take a couple of days to unpack some different reads on exactly what that looks like, on what this abomination that causes desolation is, that's mentioned in Daniel. And we're going to get to all of that. But for today, all I want to do is just go absolute face value here and look at the big structure of Jesus' answer. You're going to see some ugly things along the way. You're going to experience some ugly things along the way. That's just life when you follow Jesus. But starting in verse 15, it looks like we're getting into something more specific that will be so horrific and so evident that when the people who are there to witness it, they should be like, obviously, we do not have time to get our things. We just need to go. I mean, what comes to mind for you that would be significant enough and glaring enough that you wouldn't make one last trip back inside to grab the hard drive with all of your family pictures on it? That you would literally summon the kids from the yard, get in the vehicle, and start driving with only the clothes on your back and whatever is in that hideously overcrowded middle console in your truck? I mean, it would take a lot, right? We've lived through some weird stuff, especially the last couple of years. We've lived through some weird stuff, but nothing that rises to the level of such a complete and total disaster that we got to move now. Let's go, kids. Let's go. However, based on the rate at which Christianity and the Gospels spread, I don't think it's a stretch at all to imagine there were people who had this book, literally early copies of Matthew, sitting in front of them, maybe open, maybe even reading it, around the Naples, Italy area in the mid-70s AD when they heard a noise in the background and some screaming, and they looked out their window and they saw a gigantic volcanic cloud barreling down the slopes of Mount Vesuvius toward where they were standing. They didn't have time to grab their favorite things or even their pets. They just bolted. And I've been to Pompeii, maybe a lot of you have as well, to see the form that these people were captured in as they were overtaken by this catastrophe, this eruption that would have prompted them to say, we got to go now, 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 now. And even that wasn't enough. Now, I imagine the first generation or two of readers of the document you and I are working through right now probably summoned to mind some of the classic accounts of sieges that happened, maybe dating all the way back to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, or maybe even further back to the Assyrians. Maybe some of the Gentile readers were remembering things dating back to the 3 Punic Wars between Carthage and Rome, and for just about anybody in the Eastern Mediterranean world encountering these words after 70 AD, well, they no doubt would have thought about the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, and where the window might have been there for people to get out of Dodge as quickly as they could and flee to the hills before the legions closed in and exacted the full fury of the empire's revenge against the rebels in Jerusalem and Judea. And it might sound as we're talking like, oh, wow, that's 4, 5, 6 examples, like right there off the top of your head. But yeah, it's also over the course of 800 years and the entire ancient Western and Near Eastern world. I mean, the odds of you experiencing a cataclysm that says, don't even grab the stuff, just get out of here in your lifetime are pretty low. And if you saw it, you might be so stunned in the moment that those few key beats, those few key seconds you needed to escape whatever was happening might elapse. And so at the most basic level, the warning here is very meaningful. There is a cataclysm of some sort coming. The reckoning is not going to occur without it. We don't get crystal and immediate clarity on where it's coming from or who is going to initiate it, but there does seem to be a clear indication from Jesus that anybody who's paying attention should recognize it and be able to distinguish it from the normal trappings and difficulties of the course of history. And when you do see it, don't mess around. Get out of the way, because something unprecedentedly, historically huge is about to happen. So again, acknowledging that we've got much deeper to dive into this passage in the coming days, I think we can say at the most basic level that what Jesus is doing here is distinguishing the normal difficulties of the existence of a follower of Jesus, the normal difficulties of the unfolding of history. He's distinguishing that from this gigantic event that looks like needs to happen in Jerusalem or Judea. That seems to be how he's picturing it, probably around the temple. And we're going to see as we move ahead in this passage that once we get into this business, we're no longer in the phase of the birth pains, the Braxton Hicks contractions that were being referenced earlier. Now we're getting toward some sort of outcome that is going to change planet Earth, and that is very apparent as you read from especially verse 29 through the end of the chapter. So in the same way that a whole bunch of the extras in the all-time silver screen classic Moonfall didn't really take action until they actually saw the moon bearing down on them to crush them physically, and then immediately recognized the uniqueness of the moment and fled for the mountains. So at the simplest of levels, Jesus is saying there's going to be a very obvious thing that happens. It looks like it's going to have something to do with the temple somehow. We'll get to that later. And that when people see it, he is advising them, now you're getting toward the real deal stuff. Might be wise to step aside for a moment as this thing unfolds. That that has so many implications, and we're going to get into all of them. And if this is confusing and overwhelming, don't worry about it. There's a reason that chapter 24 has a whole bunch of verses in it, so that we got more to work with here to make sense of what this is about. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.